and share some special things tonight. We have been working with evaluations, and evaluations are essentially the core of the Toastmaster program. You can do speeches at lots of places, but it's the feedback that makes the real difference in how we progress and how we get better with our speaking. Usually I start out with people and tell them when they're brand new to Toastmasters, just tell during your evaluation what you heard, what you saw, and how did it make you feel. And if you can supply those three pieces of information to the speaker, you will give them a very helpful evaluation. Now, I'm assuming we're recording this evening. And if you would like not to be included in the recording, turn off your video. If you don't mind, then leave your video on and you'll be a participant in the recording as well. So we start out with feedback. It's a gift that we give to each other. It's an important part of our whole program. And when we do it, there's a lot of things going on while we're preparing for it. What we want to do tonight is share some things that we've learned with all of the different evaluations that our group has given individually, skills that we've learned on our own, time tested, evaluation tested, and we're going to do it in the following order. Lucille will start off by telling you about her methods for doing the evaluation. She'll be followed by David, and then I will be the third on that. So let's start off now. I'm going to introduce, please bring on Lucia. Please welcome Lucia.
Thank you very much, Jim, and fellow Toastmasters. Today, I'm going to share with you the method I use, the sandwich method of doing an evaluation. I use the sandwich method not because I'm a big foodie, but because I like to think visually. And if I have a visual image, it helps me sort my thoughts and give me some clarity in order to when I have to speak about things. It's a whole lot more than that cartoon in the top corner. Good job, bad job, good job. Like, so what? That's not very helpful, right? So let's move on. There we go. In general, the sandwich method, you're going to start off with some positive feedback. Then the filling of the sandwich, that's where the rubber hits the road. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. That is the crucial part here to give people really constructive points on which they can improve their speech. And the bottom piece of bread of the bun is, again, leaving with a positive statement. So let's start at the top piece of bread. One can open with one's overall impression of the speech. Wonderful opening statement. Great use of language. I love the way you used your body language or your vocal variety. There's a whole lot of different positive points one can point out in this opening statement. And maybe mention something that stood out particular to you. Now we get to this filling of the sandwich. This is where the awesome sauce comes in. The areas for improvement is a great opportunity to point out, I'd say pick one or two things that a person could elevate this speech to the next level. And on a sandwich level, or a culinary level, it's that sauce that gives it that bam to raise it up a notch and make it that much more delectable and at a new level. So what would be the spice or the sauce to make that speech elevate? It could be how they need to look at the camera on a Zoom platform, or it could be how to use their voice, their pacing, vocal variety, or maybe something like the use of language was really good, but they could use language because they excel at that to tie themes together within the speech, or maybe wrap it up with a more powerful, impactful closing statement. That's what's going to be your awesome sauce, and that's what's going to give this filling of the sandwich that much more meat. And this is no baloney. Moving on to the next one. The bottom piece of bread is where we sum things up. And again, it's another positive feedback in terms of summing things up a little bit, a broad sort of summary on their strengths, summing up the 2 areas or so where improvements can be made, and then ending with a statement of encouragement and thanks for the speech, looking forward to the next speech. It's pretty important to make this a very positive, positive feedback using positive language. So what does this look like when I'm taking notes? This is not very pretty, and I know that, but it isn't very pretty when we're listening to a speech and trying to jot things down as a person's talking. What I find works for me, you can see my little sketch in the middle. I've numbered them 1, 2, and 3, with 1 and 3 being the 2 pieces of bread and 2 being the filling. And as I'm making little notes on my piece of paper, at the end, when I finished writing my notes, I will number those and put arrows so it kind of formulates my thoughts and consolidates them into which part of that sandwich this fits. For me, it's a very visual experience as in terms of consolidating and sorting through my thoughts. So in summary, your top bread's the overall impression and strengths. 2 is ideas for improvement, and that's where your awesome sauce kicks in. And then summing up with a positive word of encouragement. So this is your gourmet evaluation sandwich. Voila. And on that note, I will pass the baton to David.
Well, thank you, Lucia. Excellent job. Always make me hungry. Food is a great topic to talk about. So I've got 2 items, and I'm going to stick with the food theme. The first one's more of an appetizer. Maybe it's the menu. And the second one is the real meat of how I evaluate. So in front of you, you see an evaluation form. And this is what everybody has when you're going to evaluate someone. I hope you have this. And you've probably had this thought before. Someone asks you, how was the speech? And you say, it was good. I liked it. That's not very helpful. You need to be a little more specific. Specificity is very important to your feedback to make sure it's helpful. So what do you want to be specific about? It feels like when you hear speech, it could be 1,000 different things, right? And it very well could be. But if you need help narrowing things down, look no further than the next couple pages of that evaluation form. Right here, you've got 8 different things you can think about. And I would say pick probably 3 of them that really stand out to talk about. And what do these things mean? Well, right next to it, clarity means the spoken language is clear and easily understood. Every one of these has the definition right next to it. So if you're thinking, what would I even talk about? Pick 3 of these that really stood out or could use some help. Now, on to the meat of my presentation on how I evaluate. This is called mind mapping. And some of you may have heard it before, and it probably looks like a chaotic mess. And that's because this is what my brain looks like. This is how I output. Now, in a perfect world, you would write out your speech or your evaluation from top to bottom. You'd say, I'm going to say this first, this second, this third, this fourth, and so on and so forth. That'd be great. It'd be great to write things like that. That's not how the real world works. That's not how my brain works. And I'm betting that's probably not how some of you work either. So let's talk about mind mapping. This is a completed mind map. It's a template. And in the center, you have the core idea. So the speech, in this case, for an evaluation. Surrounded by it, you've got 3 topics, 1, 2, and 3. And with those, you have support for each topic. So you got the speech circled, you got a line tying topic 1 to the speech and support off each one of them. You also have some weak topics here. And those are there because you're brainstorming along the way. Don't let any idea go unwritten down. Write it down, and eventually you'll figure out which ones the strong ones are. This is probably best done through an example. So you're ready to listen to a speech. You write the speech name down, you put a circle around it, and you're ready to listen. The speech moves on and you say, the title, there's something I could talk about with the title. So you write down title. There's something I could talk about with the comfort level. I noticed something there, so you write down comfort level. You keep going. Ooh, gestures, the writing, the vocal variety. Okay, there's something here with how this person writes it. The speech keeps going. You say, okay, vocal variety, there were good pauses. There were clever quotes. All of a sudden, these 2 topics have support. They've got some meat on the bone, right? And all of a sudden, talking about the title doesn't seem too great. So I cross that out. I'm not going to think about the title anymore. Keep going, more stuff happens. You say vocal variety needs energy. So there's good and bad here. Good and needs improvement here. The writing, chronological writing, clever quotes. It's all supporting the writing and the gestures. The hands are good. And I notice the comfort level, I don't want to talk about that anymore. Lastly, a little more support. And what's great about this layout, and the layout is the key, right? If you were to write from A to Z what's going on, how much space would you leave between stuff to go back and fill it in later? With this, the layout is built in. You can fill in anything along the way. Then once you're done, you say, I'm going to pick the 3 topics. Here's my 3 topics: vocal variety, gestures, and writing. 1, 2, 3. And you get up there and you have an organized speech, because you get to say, I'm going to tell you about 3 key areas: vocal variety, gestures, and writing. And boom, you're organized, clear, succinct. And that is how I do mind mapping. And this is useful for writing speeches, not just evaluations. So that's the meat of how I evaluate. Onward to Jim and how he evaluates. Jim.
I'm waiting for my share screen to come up.
Oh boy. There we go.
Okay.
Excellent.
And start from the... When I started out doing evaluations, I just took a blank piece of paper and just started writing notes across the page, one line after the other. And then afterwards, I had to sit there and try to organize those pieces and highlight it. And it's sort of a mind mapping way. I'd be drawing arrows from here to there to something else of what I wanted to talk about. But it was, frankly, not very efficient, not very effective. And I discovered over time a method that actually harkens back to my college days, that when I used to take notes in class, I used to basically write my notes on the left 2/3 of the page. And I put little special notes on the right-hand side of the page that helped me with taking my notes for class. And I did a better job with it, doing it that way. So I started just playing around with this. When I do an evaluation, I take my notes on the back of the agenda. Pretty high tech. And I start off with, I write down just these 3 topics: opening, body, and closing. So much like what David just talked about and what Lucia talked about, I'm going to put the information for each of those in there. But I have some special things that go along with that. On the right-hand side, I'm putting notes. So we start with the opening. I like to write down the opening as verbatim as I can get it when somebody does that, because I want to be able to point to it and tell them, how did you open the speech? With a bang or with a whimper? I want to know if they use the Toastmaster greeting, because that's something that is important to practice before we go out into the real world. Then when you get to the body of it, I try to make sure that I'm tracking the points of the speech, looking at the transitions and other things. And basically, are they giving a story? Are they working on how to piece the things together so it's got a good logical flow, that it's comforting, or there's special things in there that happened in the descriptions, in the way that it was put together. I'm really trying to look at overall how the piece is done. And then when we get down to the closing time, sometimes it's a little tough to figure out when we're actually closing. But again, I want to try to copy down the closing lines. I want to see how well those lines reflect back to the opening and the body of the speech. Did it do a good job of summarizing it? Did the speaker recount the points of what they just delivered? And anything along that line that helps with doing it. And then finally, I'm doing notes. I don't write any of these things down on the page, but I'm just providing this to give you the idea of some of the things I look for. And it's gestures, it's vocal variety, and all those things. I can read them to you. But anything that I want to do, this doesn't necessarily cover everything that I might put down there, but I know that when I'm giving my evaluation, I know where to look for the information. It's all in a place. Again, much like the mind map, much like Lucia's sandwich method, it's just a different variety of the way it works. And as David said, this is the way my mind works. But I find I don't have to rewrite the notes very often, and I can find them while I'm at the lectern to refer to the information I need. So in the end, here's what it kind of looks like when you're providing information back. And this is a handout that we'll be sending to you just so you get a chance to see what it is. David and Lucille will be providing their handouts that we'll get to you so you can see how this comes together and remember it. We're not looking at any of this to be the only way. In fact, for each of us, we've developed our own on our own based on all the different inputs. We're just thinking, here's some other inputs. Maybe this will give you an idea of how you can do evaluations. Maybe you can come up with a different skill set or way of doing it, or maybe something that works better for you. Lucia, do you have a closing thought for us?
I do. Thank you for asking, Jim. Think of what visually makes sense for you in terms of how you can pad that gift of feedback. Thinking of that gourmet sandwich, how can you add your awesome sauce?
And David, do you have a word for us?
I do. When you give a good evaluation, you'll learn just as much or maybe even more than the person receiving that evaluation. And you'll also be a better speaker if you give more evaluations.
That's very, very true. And then the last, I'd like to end up with where I started out with. Feedback is a gift. Learn how to give the gift, learn how to receive the gift. And if we can help you at all with what we gave you tonight, so much the better. We'll all be better for it. Mr. Toastmaster.
Jim, David, Lucia,